You know, if you ask any historian, what was the one single event that really kicked off British rule in India? The answer you'll almost always get is the Battle of Plassey in 1757. But the real story of what went down that day, well, it's so much more complicated, and frankly, more fascinating than just a simple victory on the battlefield.
I mean, it's the big question, right? How on earth did a trading company, the British East India Company, end up controlling a place as massive, powerful, and rich as India? Well, the whole story really starts right here. But here's the kicker. The so-called Battle of Plassey, it wasn't really a battle. Not in the way we think of one anyway. It wasn't about strategy or who had the better army. Nope. The winner was decided long before a single shot was fired.
This quote really nails it. It shifts our focus away from soldiers and cannons and points to the real weapons used at Plassey: backdoor deals, lies, and pure deception. This wasn't a military campaign. It was basically a corporate takeover, just with an army to back it up.
So why all this drama for just one province? To really get the conspiracy, you first have to understand what was at stake. We need to talk about Bengal.
Back in the 18th century, Bengal was the absolute jewel of India. It was mind-bogglingly wealthy. We're talking incredibly fertile land, a world-famous textile industry cranking out luxury goods like muslin and silk, and a really solid system for collecting taxes. On top of all that, it had the port of Calcutta, a major gateway for trade. For the East India Company, getting control of Bengal was like getting the keys to a money-printing machine.
All right, this brings us to our two main antagonists. On one side, you've got Siraj-ud-Daulah, the young ruler or Nawab of Bengal. His goal was pretty simple: keep his kingdom independent. He saw the British building illegal forts and abusing their trade permits, and he wasn't having it. On the other side, the East India Company. Their goal was even simpler: make as much money as possible. And they saw the Nawab as a major roadblock. You can see these two were on a collision course from the start.
And this is where the story pivots from just a political spat to a full-blown covert operation. The British, led by a very ambitious guy named Robert Clive, knew they couldn't just fight the Nawab in a straight-up war. They needed a backdoor.
See, Clive wasn't a fool. He looked at the Nawab's gigantic army, then looked at his own tiny force, and did the math. A fair fight was a suicide mission. So if he couldn't win with brute force, he'd have to win with bribes and betrayal.
So Clive came up with this brilliant and pretty ruthless four-step plan. First, find powerful people inside the Nawab's own court who didn't like him. Step 2, zero in on the biggest fish of all, the commander of the army, Mir Jafar. Step 3 was the offer he couldn't refuse: betray your boss and we'll make you the new Nawab. And finally, to make sure the whole thing was locked down, he brought in powerful allies like the super-rich banker Jagat Seth. This wasn't just a military plot, it was a financial one too.
So with the fix in, the stage was set for the battle. And I'm putting that in air quotes because really it was just the public performance of a deal that was already done behind closed doors.
Just look at these numbers. On June 23, 1757, the two sides met. Siraj-ud-Daulah had an army of about 50,000 men. Robert Clive had 3,000. On paper, this isn't a battle. It's an annihilation. It's a mismatch of epic proportions.
But, of course, the numbers meant absolutely nothing. The game was rigged. The fate of Bengal wasn't going to be decided by brave soldiers, but by a secret deal. And, you won't believe this, a stroke of really bad luck with the weather.
Here's how it all fell apart for the Nawab. The fighting starts in the morning. Then, around 11 a.m., a massive downpour hits. The Nawab's army hadn't protected their gunpowder, so it got soaked and became totally useless. Then, at noon, the biggest part of his army, the part led by our conspirator Mir Jafar, just stood there. They didn't move, they didn't fight. Seeing his cannon silent and his best general doing nothing, Siraj-ud-Daulah panicked. He thought everyone had betrayed him, which they had, and he fled. By 5 p.m., it was all over. The British had won, barely breaking a sweat.
The battle, if you can call it that, was over in a few hours, but the consequences, oh, the consequences, would echo through India for the next 200 years. This one act of treachery was literally the foundation stone of the British Empire in India.
The fallout was swift and absolutely brutal. Siraj-ud-Daulah was captured and executed. Just as promised, Mir Jafar was put on the throne, but everyone knew he was just a puppet. He had the title, but zero real power. The East India Company was now calling all the shots, draining Bengal's treasury and basically running the government. They weren't just merchants anymore.
You know, we talk about turning points in history. Well, this was it. This was the moment everything changed. The moment a business dispute turned into the seed of an empire, and the future of both Britain and India was altered forever.
And this really shows you the shift. Before Plassey, the East India Company was just one of several European companies trying to make a buck. After Plassey, they became the political power. They were kingmakers.
And this, right here, is the most important long-term result. All that money they squeezed out of Bengal gave the East India Company the cash it needed to build up its army and, bit by bit, conquered the rest of India. Basically, Bengal's wealth paid for India's own colonization. Plassey wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning. So we end up back where we started, but with a whole new perspective. The story of Plassey isn't one of military glory. It's the story of a highly successful and deeply cynical business deal sealed with betrayal. And that leaves us with a really challenging question to think about. If an empire's foundation is built on a lie, what does that say about everything that comes after?